Ahoy and welcome. This is Admiral. Today we're taking on the topic of Mangonels and Onagers that can track moving units. The same effect that many other ranged units get from the Ballistics Technology. I'll be briefly considering how they perform and where that might put them as far as a possible new Civ bonus or unique technology, or whether that ability should be consigned to the design graveyard alongside scrapped bonuses and obsolete technologies. As often, I'm considering this as a civilization-specific bonus or technology, as I don't consider the current behavior as a problem to be solved, so much as an opportunity to consider a unique exception for a new or reworked civilization. Now, the Mangonel-line has the dubious distinction of being the only ranged siege weapon that can't unlock automatic predictive firing to hit moving targets. Although ranged melee infantry that throw projectiles, such as throwing axemen, chakram throwers, and mamelukes, also do not have predictive firing even after ballistics. Gunpowder units and scorpions don't either, except through the Portuguese unique technology and Roman bonus that explicitly gives them this ability. Predictive firing works by aiming at the area that the enemy will arrive at if it stays on the same course as when the shot was fired, but this is not as powerful as a seeking ability that adjusts its trajectory to intercept the enemy regardless of any evasive behavior, as is the case in some other games. So you can think of it as being similar to an easier, automatic attack ground ability, but one that is less flexible than using manual attack ground. In that sense, it doesn't do much to raise the ceiling of a Mangonel's ability, as skilled players are already typically able to achieve a comparable, or sometimes better result by using attack ground.
The defense here.
Big attack ground, big attack ground. Nikon needs a big attack ground. He gets the attack ground. He kills half the army.
However, even for skilled players choosing to use this, it would reduce the burden of microing their Mangonels and free up some APM. But the most notable result of this feature is to raise the floor for people who otherwise would have difficulty making effective use of attack ground. And arguably that could give them too much of an advantage when using Mangonels, especially against crossbowmen or enemy Mangonels, given that the players who would benefit most from this would usually be matched against enemies who would be less able to replicate the effect themselves via attack ground, and less experienced with evasive movement. So I lean towards thinking that this effect should not exist as a free civilization bonus, at least for Mangonels, as it would have too strong an impact on what is appropriately a fairly finely balanced benchmark of skill in Castle Age Mangonel Micro. Although locking it behind the Ballistics Technology, as with Roman Scorpions, might come late enough to be an acceptable compromise. In any case, by the time Imperial Age rolls around, along with Onagers and Siege Onagers, the constraints around the unit loosen quite a bit, and several civilizations receive powerful technologies for their Mangonel-line that was generic, or nearly so, in Castle Age. As for how Ballistics stacks up against generic Onagers or other bonuses, it's a bit hard to quantify beyond the binary possibilities of hitting something or not. It's clearly an advantage when the enemy is trying to evade or micro around your shots, and does provide a fair amount of passive value against enemies who are just passing. The predictive firing also allows your shots to land slightly within the minimum range of the Mangonel or Onager, with a similar benefit and potential drawback to the Korean team bonus of decreased minimum range. Stacking them both may be fairly strong, or too much of a good thing, depending on the situation. But for an extended head-on engagement where the enemy is charging you, the Ballistics Onagers seem to provide only a slight advantage, hard to distinguish from generic Onagers in terms of damage output, and inferior to Saracen, Celt, or Ethiopian Onagers in that regard. This shouldn't be too surprising given that movement tracking provides no extra damage to enemies standing still, and that for the purposes of total damage dealt by a given area effect attack, a steady state of streaming enemies models fairly similarly to units standing still. The generic Onagers without ballistics may miss their intended targets in the front row, but as long as there's another layer of oncoming enemies marching forward to eat rocks, the Onager's damage is not wasted. One thing to be aware of with regards to the Mangonel-line is that their projectiles are among the slowest in the game at 3.5 tiles per second. They're still faster than any controllable non-cheat unit, but they move at half the speed of arrows fired by any archer unit, and even Scorpion projectiles are significantly faster. So a shot from a Ballistics Mangonel or Onager can often be dodged if you're paying attention, especially at the further reaches of the weapon's range, and even small deviations in the target's movement, such as normal bumping, pathing around, or stopping to attack a unit, can result in missing or grazing shots. Which brings up the interesting prospect of faster projectiles as a Civ bonus, although that would require similar restraints on Castle Age Mangonels to what I've mentioned here, and we'll save that discussion for another time. In summary, this effect is likely too strong to be given freely in Castle Age, but seems moderate enough by Imperial Age and provides the effect of reliably damaging moving units without having to put high effort into microing your Onagers with attack ground. This could be implemented as a unique technology, possibly with some additional effect, or as a civilization bonus, but one that skips over the Mangonel and only applies to Onagers or Siege Onagers, or applies to the whole unit line, but only becomes active when you reach the Imperial Age, or is tied to the Ballistics Technology at most. So these are my thoughts on Ballistics Onagers, and you can leave your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this has the potential to be an interesting future bonus or technology? Or does it go too far down the path of auto-micro that MBL tried to warn us about years ago? If you like this type of video, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm off to do some investigations to answer the urgent question of whether petards should gain the attack ground ability. Till next time.